Hey everyone! So thanks for joining our third video of the nutrient timing sequence. The first video I did was about pre-training fueling and pre-match fueling. The second video is how do we fuel during training and during a match or during competition. And this is going to be all about timing in terms of recovery. We're going to talk about the 3 R's of recovery just briefly and why they're important and what they entail. So a big piece, and probably the most important piece when it comes to recovery, is knowing the time frame of which we need to incorporate recovery nutrition. A lot of times athletes are thinking about foam rolling, stretching, massage, doing those types of treatments, but they're not thinking about the nutrition piece, which is super, super important. So if you're noticing that you have delayed recovery, you're having extended muscle soreness, taking a peek at your nutrition and seeing how you're doing in terms of that recovery nutrition is going to be really vital. So when is it really important? So post-training, post-competition, we really want to make sure that we're getting good nutrition into our system within 60 minutes. So if you're planning on having a meal, that is totally perfect. We're focusing on a balanced plate and including carbohydrates and protein. But if you don't have a meal planned within that 60-minute window, it's really important to make sure that you have a recovery snack planned out because not always is there something available. So we have to be proactive in thinking ahead. So what would be included in that snack? We want to make sure when we think about the 3 R's of recovery, the first R is refueling, and that has to do with carbohydrates. So anytime that we are exercising, training, competing, we are burning through our primary source of fuel, which is carbohydrates. And that source is readily available, stored in our muscle and our liver in the form of glycogen. So as we're depleting that during our training, during our competition, we have to make sure that we're repleting it post. So what that's going to look like, typically for most athletes, it's a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein in that recovery snack. But if you're more of an endurance-based athlete, it might even be 4 to 1. So 4 units of carbohydrate for 1 unit of protein. Thinking in terms of the 2 to 3 to 1 ratio, typically that's going to be roughly around 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. If you're doing more endurance, it might be up to 60, 75 grams of carbohydrate in terms of that recovery piece. When we think about repair, which is the second R, so first it was restore or refueling, which is carbohydrates. The second is repair, which is related to protein. We have to make sure that we're getting a good source of protein because what happens when we are training is that our muscles are being challenged in different ways, stretched, and they need that rebuilding immediately post-training because as we get that nutrition, we transition from a catabolic or a breakdown state, which is happening when we're training, into a building state to make sure that we're optimizing that recovery. And the sooner we can do that, if we can get it in that first 60-minute window, that's going to be really important for optimizing recovery. So in terms of protein, typically a minimum amount of protein is going to be 10 to 15 grams of protein. We don't need to go overboard and have like 60 grams of protein after we're training, but depending on the type of activity and also dietary preferences, if you are an athlete following more of a plant-based diet, the protein sources are not as easily absorbed from our plant-based sources. So that will increase your need for protein. Or if you're just a larger athlete, that's going to increase. It's going to be higher than 10 to 15 grams of protein. But I like to just say that as a baseline because we want to make sure that we're getting in protein in that recovery piece because it's not just refueling those muscles, it's also repairing. And the third R to recovery is rehydrating. And that's super important in these summer months when it's really stinking warm and we're losing a lot of not only fluid in our sweat, but electrolytes, right? So when we talked about hydration, we mentioned that it's not just that we need to be drinking water, especially if we're a salty sweater or a heavy sweater. We want to make sure that we're also replacing those electrolytes. So water is important, but other opportunities to get in some of those electrolytes might be coconut water. Milk is really fantastic. So like the powerhouse recovery drink is chocolate milk. You're getting in carbohydrates, you're getting in protein, you're also getting in some great electrolytes for hydration. Sports drinks. So we want to think about when we're using sports drinks, but post-training, post-competition, it can be a great way to get in some carbohydrate, to also get in some electrolytes, but it's not going to provide that protein piece. So we want to make sure that we're also doing that protein piece. Fruit juice might be a great way to not only get in carbohydrates, but also get in some electrolytes. One that a lot of the athletes I work with will use is tart cherry juice because it has a lot of super awesome antioxidant benefits and helpful benefits in terms of that recovery piece. So what you might do is pair a whey protein powder, which is primarily protein, unless it has carbohydrates mixed into it. You might pair that whey protein powder or whey protein isolate along with some tart cherry juice to make a perfect, beautiful recovery drink that has fluid, it has electrolytes, it has carbohydrates, and it also has protein. So the 3 R's in terms of recovery is refueling, which is carbohydrate, repairing, which is protein, and rehydrating, which is fluid and electrolytes. Make sure that you're also getting those electrolytes. So a good example of what that might look like in terms of food for recovery, it might be cottage cheese with a piece of fruit and making sure that we're adding liquids along with that to rehydrate. It might be a whey protein shake with a piece of fruit, or like I said, tart cherry juice. It could be a turkey sandwich. We're getting some protein from the turkey or getting carbohydrates from the bread. It might be a tuna packet on a piece of toast or a piece of bread. It could be hummus and pretzels. That makes for a great combination to get both protein and carbohydrates. You're also going to get some sodium in terms of electrolytes for rehydrating. So those are the 3 R's to recovery. So this concludes our 3-part series on the timing of nutrients around training and competition. So we talked about pre, we talked about during, and this is post. So these are critical windows that can make a big impact on your performance overall and also your recovery, how you're feeling coming out of that training session or coming out of that competition. All right. So let me know if you have any questions.